Hello, everyone. This is the 215th episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. For this episode, I interview Iranian author Mr. Djamshid Foroughi and Irish freelance writer, historian, and broadcaster Mr. John O'Carroll as we discuss the November 2001 World Cup qualifying playoffs between Republic of Ireland and Iran. Mr. Foroughi is an Iranian author, interpreter, translator, and football historian. And Mr. O'Carroll has appeared many times on a podcast discussing the history of Irish football. Welcome to both of you.
Good evening, Shahan.
Thank you, Sean.
Good evening,
Good evening,
DJ.
Sean. Yes, good evening, John, and pleased to be on your program, Sean, as always.
Thank you. Let's go back in time to the fall of 2001. And let's start with Ireland. What was the status of Irish football at international level in this late 2001 since their last World Cup appearance in 1994?
In many ways, Shahan, the fall of 2001, it was kind of at the stage where Ireland were kind of enjoying a kind of a second coming as such in international soccer, because as you mentioned there, the last World Cup appearance previous to this had been in 1994. They had an unsuccessful qualification for Euro 96, so that culminated in Jack Charlton stepping down. Mick McCarthy came in as manager, succeeded Jack, and it was obvious, like by 1996 or thereabouts, that some team rebuilding was needed. Now, I mean, whether Jack had stayed or not would have been indifferent to this, because a team rebuilding by 1996 or so was going to be needed anyway. So Mick McCarthy came in 1996, and his first task was to guide Ireland through the qualification campaign for the 1998 World Cup. Just to go quickly over it, we finished second in the qualifying group, which included Romania, Macedonia and Lithuania, and that took us into a two-leg playoff against Belgium, which we lost over the two legs. We drew the first leg in Dublin, but we lost the second and decisive leg in Brussels. So it was obvious anyway, by the end of 97, that age had caught up with a lot of the players who had been mainstays during the Charlton era and who were still playing international soccer at this stage. Players like Andy Townsend, Ray Houghton, Paul McGrath had finished actually in the spring of 1997. So Mick McCarthy's job really, in addition to kind of keeping us competitive and hopefully qualifying for tournaments, was to reintegrate, shall we say, some younger players that were coming through. Now, the signs were promising around about 97, 98, because in 1997, Ireland actually finished third at the FIFA Under-20 World Cup. And that was the first and only time to date that an Irish men's soccer team have reached the semi-finals of a world tournament. So they finished third. They eventually ended up only losing to Argentina in the semi-finals, who went on to win the competition. And that team produced players like Damien Duff. Robbie Keane was coming to prominence here at this stage as well. I think he may have been involved. He was 17 in 1997. Now, he may have been in that under-20 squad as a squad member. I'm not too sure. But there was some young players coming through, players like Kevin Kilbane, Gary Breen, and some others as well, that were going to prove the mainstay of the Irish international soccer team for the next decade or so. And in 1998, in the spring of 1998, the Republic of Ireland, they secured two significant victories in that they won both the European Under-16 Championship and also the European Under-18 Championship, defeating Germany in the final of the latter. They defeated Italy in the final of the Under-16. And that tournament really brought Robbie Keane to prominence. He featured in it, and he had actually made his senior debut in a friendly in April of 1998 against Argentina. So, I mean, the signs were promising that, there was good young players coming through. And some of these players, Shahan, significantly were home-produced players. Like, we weren't always relying, shall we say, on players with Irish parentage or Irish grandparentage by this stage. We had a significant number of home-based players coming through. So that took us on then to the qualification for Euro 2000. And again, we were in a tough group. We were in with Croatia, who finished third at France 98. And we were also in with Yugoslavia. Now, again, I mean, we probably should have qualified for Euro 2000, but maybe like we were in a strong position for most of the qualification campaign. But ultimately, in the last couple of matches, I suppose some inexperience and injuries to some players proved our undoing. So we ended up again in a playoff for Euro 2000 against Turkey, which we lost on the away goals rule. We drew 1-1 in Dublin and 0-0 in Turkey. And that 0-0 in Turkey in November 99 also happened to be Tony Cascarino's last game. And actually his last act as an Ireland player was to get sent off because there was something of a fracas after that game. So Tony received a red card. So that was his last act in an Ireland jersey. But yeah, for the 2002 World Cup then, again, we were in a tough qualifying group for this. We were in with Portugal and we were in with the Netherlands. And both Portugal and the Netherlands had qualified for the semi-finals of Euro 2000. So, I mean, it was going to be a difficult qualification campaign. Now, Mick McCarthy, he took a gamble, which ultimately paid off in that when the fixtures were being made for the 2002 qualifiers, he gambled on getting the away games against Portugal and the Netherlands played early in the fall of 2000 to kind of get them out of the Republic's way early. Now, we got positive results in both those games. We actually drew 2-2 in our first game in September of 2000 against the Dutch in Rotterdam. We were actually 2-0 up with 20 minutes to go. Robbie Keane scored both goals. So maybe we could have actually won that game. And Roy Keane gave a television interview afterwards. And I think this was the first kind of, shall we say, the first kind of crack that there was between him and, shall we say, Mick McCarthy and some of the other Irish players in that. Roy Keane felt, it had been 3 points dropped rather than a point gained, having relinquished a 2-0 lead with 20 minutes to go. So we went on then to Portugal, and again we got a 1-1 draw out there. Matt Holland, another player who was coming into prominence at this stage, he scored an excellent goal, a long-range shot from the edge of the penalty area. So those two away games set us up in good stead. So we continued on then through the qualification campaign. We picked up victories against Estonia and Andorra, and a notable 4-0 win in March of 2001 against Cyprus, in which Roy Keane scored 2 goals. So that took us on then to June of 2001 and the return qualifier against Portugal in Dublin. Now, this was a game we drew 1-1, and I think for once, considering the game was in Dublin, I think we could have been happy enough with a draw, because I remember that game well, and it was one of the few occasions I recall during that era where a team came to Dublin and actually played us off the field for certainly the first half an hour of the game or so. So, I mean, in the overall scheme of things, I suppose maybe we were happy enough to get a draw out of that game against Portugal, even though it was a dropped home point. So that really set us up really for a monumental qualifier against the Dutch on the 1st of September 2001, because we have to bear in mind, I mean, ourselves, Portugal and the Dutch, I mean, all three of us were taking care of Cyprus and Andorra and Estonia, so there was no points being dropped either. So it was really going to come down to the head-to-head results between ourselves, Portugal and the Dutch. And the Dutch had made something of a sluggish start in that they had only taken 1 point from their 2 games against Portugal. And they also, of course, had dropped points in Rotterdam against us back the previous September. So going into that game anyway, it was a 3-horse race, but this Ireland-Netherlands game was really going to be an eliminator. We were fortunate in that we were a point ahead of the Dutch, so a draw would still have kind of kept us in the driving seat for certainly a playoff position anyway. But in what turned out to be a monumental performance, and is still spoken about to this day, the Republic beat the Dutch 1-0. Roy Keane actually played a prominent part in that game, and it was actually he set up the winning goal for Jason McAteer. And this victory over the Dutch was all the more notable in that we were reduced to 10 men 10 minutes into the second half when Gary Kelly received a second yellow card. So, I mean, to beat the Dutch, who were a high-flying team at the time, and with 10 men at that, was an achievement in itself. So after that victory against the Dutch, as I say, it was a momentous victory, and that kind of put the Dutch out of the reckoning at that stage, because with 2 qualifying games to go, ourselves and Portugal were 4 points ahead of the Dutch. So that sort of, what all that meant then was it was really only left between ourselves and Portugal to see who would top the group and get the automatic place. So we were hoping that Portugal might drop a point in Cyprus, but it wasn't to be. And Portugal Portugal won in Cyprus, and Portugal won their last game as well. And we also won our last game at home, which was against Cyprus, as it turned out. So all that meant that ourselves and Portugal finished with 24 points each from 10 games, 7 wins and 3 draws. Portugal won the group because they had a superior goal difference. They actually scored 7 in one of their games against Andorra, the home game, I think it was. And actually, when we played Andorra at home, we only won 3-1, having had to come from behind. So it was that kind of inability to put up a lot of goals against Andorra really cost us automatic qualification. But what it meant was that even though we went through the group unbeaten, we finished second, and that put us into a playoff. Now, there was hope as well that we would qualify, because in September, the draw for the playoffs had been made. You see, the draw for the playoffs that year were made in advance of the UEFA groups concluding. So we knew that if we finished second in the group, we would be playing a team from Asia. And as it turned out, that team turned out to be Iran. Now, we were wary of Iran because certainly the knowledgeable soccer supporters in Ireland would have been familiar with Iran after their performances at the 1998 World Cup, in which they done quite well. And of course, I know you done another podcast some time back on a famous playoff game between Iran and Australia in 1997. That game actually had been broadcast here. It was available to see here in Ireland through the Eurosport channel. So, a lot of knowledgeable soccer supporters, we would have been aware of Iran and the threat that they would have posed to us. Because I remember watching the 2 qualifying games against Australia in 1997. So, I personally was aware of them myself and, how good they were and so on. And, they did have a decent 1998 World Cup. They were in a tough group with Germany, Yugoslavia and the USA, and they beat the USA and they lost the other 2 games narrowly at that. So, we knew Iran were a decent team at that stage and they were going to be difficult to beat. However, considering that we had come through a qualifying group that included Portugal and the Netherlands, and we had come through that group unbeaten, having got 24 points. In actual fact, Shahan, in some of the other groups, teams qualified automatically, having got less than 24 points. So that will just give you an idea as to how difficult our qualifying group was. So having come through that, even though we were going to respect Iran and we knew they were going to be a tough assignment over 2 legs, particularly the return leg in Tehran, there was a quite optimism there that we could get off this hurdle and make it to the World Cup in 2002.
So, Djamshid, as John said, Iran had qualified to the 98 World Cup, their last appearance. Had their status changed internationally at this point?
Well, good question, Sean. It depends on who you ask, obviously. As John mentioned, knowledgeable football supporters, fans, correspondents, followers, historians would have known that at that particular stage of development or redevelopment of the various national teams involved, Iran was actually going through a transitionary period. The 98 World Cup, as John mentioned, proved satisfying. A little disappointing in the sense that the first match against Yugoslavia, and I've watched that match numerous times. I normally never watch any replays of any matches that Iran loses in any sport. So that's typically my approach. But in matches when we've played well, sometimes even outplayed opponents, but lost, and that's something that happens, I do like to go back and remind myself that the performance deserved a better result. So the first match against Yugoslavia, we lost to a Mihailovic free kick, which was not unusual in those days. Mihailovic, of course, Sinisa Mihailovic was very well known as one of the best dead ball specialists in the world, actually. The match against the USA, of course, is historic. No need to go into the details there. And then the match against Germany, we held them for the first half. But it was one of those matches, and I was there for the 1998 World Cup in person. You sensed in the stadium that the second half, we probably wouldn't be able to keep up the resistance. And so it proved. We lost 2-0. The next real phase was the Asian Cup of 2000 in Lebanon. Iran was one of the favorites based on recent past performances. Led South Korea in the quarterfinal 1-0 with a few minutes to go. Major error in the penalty area on a corner led to a South Korean tying goal. Went to overtime, lost in overtime. The momentum has shifted. So that looks, upon a reflection, as a very disappointing tournament and effectively cost Jalal Talibi his job a few months later. We had an interim manager, a Brazilian named Vladimir Braga, who started the 2002 qualifying campaign with 3 victories, actually. So he was doing well. But then Miroslav Blažević entered the fray. And everything really changed. Blažević was outspoken. He was brash in a good kind of way. I say that as a positive comment, and endeared himself to the Iranian fan base immediately. He brought on some new players. He did a great scouting job. Branko Ivankovic was his assistant, and Ivankovic was sent to the various provinces to follow regional leagues and try to find players, unearth some gems, and he did that. And so by the time the next qualifying matches came up, we had a much younger team with good substitutes, players like Javad Nukunam, who actually were on the fringe. Nukunam actually ended up staying on the bench for both matches against the Republic of Ireland. We had Ali Karimi, who had just emerged as the next star of Iranian football. Ali Reza Vaidi Nikbat on the left, very young talent. So Blažević wasn't Rahman Rezai, in my opinion, the best defender in Iranian football history by far, although a lot of people disagree with my opinion. And so it was a replenishment of younger blood mixed in with a lot of solid veterans like Ali Daei, Mehdi Mahtabi Kio. We had 5 players actually in the team that played Ireland, who played in the top, 4 of them played in the top European leagues. 1 played in Belgium. It was a team on the ascendancy again after a bit of a dip. But as John indicated, I knew for sure Ireland would be favorites, primarily because of the form they had shown, the tough group they had navigated, and the fact that we were dropping points in qualifying to teams that we should have been beating easily. And so we were experiencing some of the same challenges with not being able to put on paper weaker teams away. So in our group, we had Saudi Arabia, traditional rival. And when I say traditional, meaning going back to the 70s, because prior to that, Iran really had almost no rivals in Asian football. We managed to beat them in Tehran 2-0, great result. Tied them away in Saudi Arabia 2-2. Beat Iraq, and always with Iraq, we used to call Iraq we have a saying in Farsi, Gorbesia, black cat, meaning we're jinxed.
Yeah.
They always
noir.
seem to get
Yeah.
Yes, and they always seem to get the better of us, but we beat them 2-1 home and away. So we navigated the tough matches, and then we encountered Thailand, and that was actually a very strong Thai team. We beat them 1-0 at home, but tied them 0-0 in Bangkok, so we dropped 2 points there. Then we played Bahrain at home in a match we should have won easily and had a couple of goals disallowed. That ended up 0-0, so we drop another 2 points, and then we go into the last match against Bahrain in Bahrain, very confident, just full of confidence. All we needed to do was get 3 points. We traditionally always beaten Bahrain, and that was probably one of the darkest days of Iranian football. We lost 3-1, had a couple players sent off, very, very ill-tempered match. The Bahraini fans were all in the stadium with Saudi Arabian flags because if Bahrain won, Saudi would qualify. And after the match, the players ran around the stadium with a Saudi flag, and we'll never forget that. So every time to this day we play Bahrain, I'm in front of the television and just pray for a thumping of the Bahraini teams because the disrespect they showed was unbelievable. So we ended up in that playoff spot that John alluded to, and unfortunately drew the European playoff qualifier, and went into that having to play the United Arab Emirates in an Asian playoff first, beat them handily, 1-0 at home, 3-0 away, actually, interestingly enough. But in both matches, the result wasn't in question. And at the time, given the fact that the World Cup was being staged in Asia for the first time, there were 2 co-hosts, South Korea and Japan. There were only really 2 slots available for qualification. The Saudis had wrapped up one. China had wrapped up the other one very easily in a somewhat easier final group stage. The UAE had finished second, Iran, the UAE playoff, and now we're facing Ireland, one of the teams I wouldn't want to face because I always liked the Irish. That's another story in itself. So I was very fond of Ireland as a nation, as a community, as a culture. And of course, I'm a huge Manchester United fan going back to 1968. And Manchester United was always a top destination for Irish footballers. None better than George Best. And I won't distinguish between Northern Ireland and the Republic in this case.
You just mentioned quickly there about you being a Manchester United fan. Well, that makes 2 of us.
Well, I'm so pleased to be on this show, even more so than prior to getting the invitation. Wonderful to hear, John. I was heartbroken in the sense that we'd have to play against Roy Keane. And in as
Yes.
much as I am a diehard supporter of Iran and always will be, and that's always my first team, there was a little bit of me going into this playoff where I was hoping Roy Keane wouldn't play, not because of injury. I didn't want him to be injured, although he was suffering from a knee injury at the time, as I'm sure you remember.
Right. I was
But
about to say there was some doubt whether he would participate in these matches. Yeah.
Yeah.
and I was hoping because it would give us a better chance. It would give Iran a better chance, not having Roy Keane on the pitch. And he proved that with, I think it was a first minute tackle on Mohamed Khavianpour, which just wiped him out and set the tone for the match, I think, in Dublin. But also, this way I could be 100% supportive of Iran, not even having a half a percent of doubt because Roy Keane was on the same pitch. But that didn't
Yeah.
happen. I think we'll talk about, of course, the matches a little bit later. But again, this was a very, very good Iran side that had a mixture of youth, experience, many players nearing the peak or at their peak, very few who may have been past their peak. But we did have a couple of weak spots. Goalkeeper was one. And you can't go back and necessarily say it was the best Iran side of all time, but it was in the process of becoming one. And
Yeah.
perhaps another year later, more experience under someone like Blazovic, things could have been different. But football is all about timing. You know, different national sides peak, go through troughs. And going into those two matches, I was not hopeful at all. And I'll just end my soliloquy right now with the comment that two of my very close friends, two brothers actually, purchased tickets to go to the Dublin match. And without even telling me, purchased a ticket for me. And I turned them down because I just didn't have a good feeling. And I didn't want to
Yeah.
be visiting Ireland for the first time, and instead of enjoying all the beauties and all the wonderful things that Ireland has to offer, find myself in a lonely pub with my head down and having Irish fans drinking and celebrating all around me. I said I didn't want to be in that situation. So, and I'm glad I did that. It would have been, I'm sure, a great experience, but I'm still looking forward to going to Ireland for the first time without any football being involved. Just go to the Guinness Brewery and visit all the various counties and get on a bicycle and hit all the pubs in the country and go to the various historic sites that I've always read about and been a big fan of. So that's where we
Of
ended
course,
up.
of course, your main player, I suppose, the player that would have been best known in Ireland would have been Ali D. He was with
Yes, of
Bayern Munich
course.
at this time.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And he was Asian Football of the Year in 1999 when the Asian Football of the Year award actually meant something. It changed in 2005. It became a popularity contest. From its inception until 2004, the AFC would select the best Asian player on the globe, whether they played in Europe or in Asia or wherever they may have displayed their skills. And Ali Daei was still really in his best years. He was playing for Hertha Berlin at the time. He was doing well. He was getting much more match time than he did at Bayern Munich. And he was really, in many ways, not only the captain, but the leader, basically a Roy Keane type of figure in the dressing room and someone who led by example, who remember played against Iraq once and was hit so many times, was fouled so many times that they actually split his spleen. And he finished the match, scored the winning goal, went to the hospital, and stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks. That kind of character. And so you're absolutely right, John. At that time, he would have been the main name, main star, main figure. But there were other players as well. You indicated something about the Roy Keane Mick McCarthy relationship briefly, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later. But Mick McCarthy is on my list of least likable football characters in modern history, partly because of how the bust up occurred between him and Roy Keane. And I remember reading somewhere in one of the Irish papers, I think, leading up to these playoff matches, because I read everything, whether it was in the English papers, the Irish papers, all sorts of sources. And living in America, of course, we were deprived of sufficient coverage to keep the interest going. And I remember somewhere someone was quoted as saying, I think it was one of the Irish correspondents asked Mick McCarthy, so is this your team or is this Roy Keane's team? And I remember thinking to myself, that's Roy Keane's team. Mick McCarthy is just there soaking up the plaudits as the manager, but it's Roy Keane's team. And I never forgive Mick McCarthy for the bust up in, I think it was Saipan in Japan.
Yes,
That Irish team did so well in 2002. And let's remember, they
it
beat
did.
Saudi Arabia 3-0, could have won 5-6-0. And that's the difference. The Iran team that Ireland got past in 2001 was far, far better, far superior to the Saudi team that ended up in the World Cup. But that's
Yes.
what happens if you don't do the business against the so-called weaker teams, and you end up in a playoff and you face Ireland at a time when Ireland is really doing well. And John, I can't agree with you more. When the draw was made for the UEFA qualification process for the 2000 World, I didn't think Ireland. I was a big Irish football fan, always have been. I also, of course, I've always liked the Dutch because of their football style and their history, and Portugal is Portugal. But I didn't see them getting out of that group. And once
Yes.
they did, in the manner they did, as you so well described, I knew we were in trouble. I knew we were in trouble. And by the way, we should also, Sean, mention Iran and Ireland played for the first time in 1972. So we
Yeah, I
had a
was
bit of
about
a
to say,
national
yeah.
team history.
It
Yes,
was during the Brazil Independence Cup. That was the only
exactly.
previous encounter on June 11, 1972, that at Recife, that the Irish won 2-1.
And that 2-1 win for the Irish was particularly significant because at that time we were really kind of, I suppose, among the lower lights of international soccer. And that win against Iran in June 1972 was our first international victory in any international in 4.5 years. You had to go back to November 1967 and a Euro 68 qualifier against Czechoslovakia for our previous win.
Those were days of, you almost felt like football was a hobby, a pastime more than it was a business, a life and death. And the loss didn't make us happy, but we were just happy to be there to play top teams. And we consider Ireland one of the top teams. It was a European team. And this was an Iran team that really was almost exclusively built on matches against Asian competition. So just entering the 72 Independence Cup, as Shahan mentioned, was just a wonderful opportunity to play Portugal. We lost 3-0 to a Eusebio-led side. No disgrace there. We tied Ecuador 1-1. We lost to Ireland 2-1. And Sean, don't tell me because I need to remember this myself. We lost our other match, Chile, 2-1. So we lost 3 matches, tied 1, but we were very happy. It was a good experience. The players developed. These were times where, as you indicated, maybe for Ireland, it wasn't a great time in terms of national team results. But I don't feel like at the time football was a vehicle for investment
Yeah.
by Ireland, period. Football was football.
Yeah.
In 2001, ahead of these matches, where were you each in life and how did you experience these matches?
I was in my mid-20s, working in office management, and I suppose kind of like any, 20-something enjoying life at that stage or enjoying it as best I could. That's where I was in life. And of course, kind of keenly following soccer. Kind of, we didn't have the saturation television coverage of soccer back then that we had now. So anytime there was a soccer game on television, I always made sure if I was around at all to tune into it.
And I was 44, about to turn 45 the following week in a Irish pub in Washington, D.C. And you might think, why an Irish pub? Because as John alluded to, not only was there not a saturation of coverage, but in the United States, it was just still very difficult. You'd have to find a business, a facility, a pub that was showing the match through satellite. And so we went there with a couple of friends and watched it there. And I just remember it was a very, very dark pub, which matched my spirits after the match.
Yes.
The first leg was on November 10th, 2001. It was at Dublin at Lansdowne Road. For Ireland, we have the following lineup: Shay Given in goal from Newcastle United, Steve Finnan of Fulham, Gary Breen of Coventry City, Steve Staunton of Aston Villa. He'd be replaced by Kenny Cunningham of Wimbledon in the 75th minute, Ian Hart of Leeds, Jason McAteer of Sunderland. He'd be replaced by Gary Kelly of Leeds in the 84th minute, Matt Holland of Ipswich Town, captain of the team Roy Keane of Manchester United, Kevin Kilban of Sunderland, Niall Quinn of Sunderland, and Robbie Keane of Leeds United. For Iran, we have the following lineup. Iran managed by the Croatian Miroslav Blažević, Ebrahim Mirzapur of Fulad Khuzestan, Afshin Peyrovani of Persepolis, Yahya Gol Mohammadi of Fulad Khuzestan, Rahman Rezai playing in Perugia in Italy, Mehrdad Minavand of Persepolis, Karim Bagheri playing at Al Sadd at Qatar, Hamid Kavianpur of Persepolis, Mehdi Mahdavikia of Hamburg in Germany, Ali Karimi of Al Ahli Dubai of United Arab Emirates, Ali Reza Vahid Nikbacht of Esteghlal. He'll be replaced by Mojahed Khazi Ravi of Esteghlal in the 46th minute, and Ali Dai, captain of a team from Hertha Berlin. This match, Ireland would take the lead in the 44th minute. Rahman Rezai fouled Jason McAteer in the box, and Ian Hart would score from the penalty kick to give Ireland a 1-0 lead in the first half. Early in the second half, in the 51st minute, Jason McAteer's free kick from the right side was volleyed by Robbie Keane, and Ireland had a seemingly comfortable 2-0 lead going into the second leg.
Your summation was quite correct, Shahan. It was always going to be a tense occasion because there was so much at stake. As I said already, there was cautious optimism in Ireland that we would prevail over the two legs. However, it was felt that we were going to have to get a positive result in the first leg. And no matter what, we were not under any circumstance to concede a goal at home. Because in the previous two tournament qualifications in playoffs, goals conceded in the home legs of these playoffs had cost us dearly. So it was felt that under no circumstances were we to concede a goal. So anything after that was a bonus. It was a positive performance from the Irish, as you summed it up there quite well. They won 2-0, and I think in the overall scheme of things, they about deserved it. Even though we knew that 2-0 was always going to be a dangerous lead going to Iran, particularly to Tehran, where the atmosphere there could be, I suppose, quite hostile towards recent teams. And we were also, of course, going to be without Roy Keane for the second leg. In actual fact, this game in Dublin was actually Roy Keane's last competitive appearance for Ireland under Mick McCarthy. And of course, in the disagreement then that Mick and Roy had in Saipan, of course, this Roy Keane not being available for the second leg of this game was discussed in the argument or came up in the argument as well, because Roy Keane has been adamant to this day that he was carrying an injury going into this game and that Mick McCarthy had spoke to Alex Ferguson and they agreed that Roy Keane would play the first leg, and if we got a positive result in the first leg, that Roy would be rested for the second leg in order to give him a chance to recover from the injury. So that was the thinking behind it. So, yeah, it was a good solid 2-0 win. We didn't concede a goal, which was most important of all. We had a 2-0 lead to take, even though, again, for the second leg, we were going to be without Niall Quinn. He was Robbie Keane's kind of perfect strike partner because although Niall wasn't a prolific scorer himself, he was the sort of player that you could play the high balls into and he could break the balls down, for Robbie Keane to capitalise on.
Yes, although I don't think Robbie was very little, but compared to Niall, everyone was little. I remember seeing Niall Quinn live in action, playing for Ireland against the United States in, was it 92?
92, yeah.
You couldn't hit the ball against him. There was not a single, he lost 0 duels in the air in that match, even though Ireland ended up losing, despite outplaying the United States. However, the goal that, Sean, you referenced, that Robbie Keane scored in the 50th or 51st minute, came from a Jason McAteer free kick that was headed away into the path of Robbie Keane by Niall Quinn, who had 2 men marking him and still managed to basically squirm a header in the right direction, and then Robbie Keane volleyed it. So having Niall Quinn up there, if it wasn't Niall Quinn, Rahman Rezai and Afshin Peyrovani, and one of them would have headed that ball away, hopefully further than as far as necessary to make sure that it wasn't volleyed back in. But Niall Quinn played a very important role in that second goal.
And actually, that's a very good point you make, DJ, in that Niall Quinn was also playing a similar role at this time for Sunderland, in that he was partnered up for Sunderland with Kevin Phillips, who would have been kind of similar in stature to, shall we say, kind of in height and so on to Robbie Keane. So it was kind of big man, little man there as well. So
Keegan Toshak, same kind of combination.
Yes.
The big man, the little man. Yes. And I think Kevin Phillips was the Premier League top scorer that year.
I think he was. Yes. Yeah, you're right there. Yeah.
2000, if I'm not mistaken. Thanks to Niall Quinn. I thought Niall Quinn was just a very underrated player.
Well, he wasn't a prolific scorer, and even at times there in the Ireland team up to 2000 or so, there was always he seemed to be alternating with Tony Cascarino for a certain spot.
Yes.
Because, again, Tony would have played a similar role. Now, it was felt the difference between Tony and Niall Quinn was that Tony was stronger in the air. He could get more power into his headers, but Niall had a little more skill on the ground than Tony had. So, yeah.
And his hold-up play was excellent too.
Yeah, and I think in some cases, Jack and Mick McCarthy would have referred to playing Niall and Tony in alternate games because they were both very similar, you see. So,
sure.
Yeah.
With one other difference, Niall was much more Irish.
Well, that's true. It came out years later that actually Tony never qualified for Ireland. He never had an Irish grandparent. That the person he thought was his Irish grandparent actually was not his grandparent at all.
Right. That's why I had to make that comment, that remark.
Yeah.
Sean, I'm actually completely in line with John in terms of his assessment of the match. I think it was a deserved 2-0 win. I do have to state that once Khaziravi was introduced in the second half for Vaidini Kbach, Iran started having a little bit more of the play. There were more dribbles. There were more penetrative attacks. And of course, Ireland, after the second goal, was sitting back a bit, understandably. But the last 10 minutes, there was all of a sudden a wave of optimism amongst us because we noticed that Karimi had gone up as the lone striker. Dai was playing a little further back and helping win midfield battles and playing, balls to Karimi. And I still think to this day, if it wasn't for Shay Given, if it had been another less brilliant goalkeeper, because I believe still, John, that Shay Given is the best Irish keeper of all time.
Yeah.
I should say Republic of Ireland keeper of all time, because I think people will make comments about Pat Jennings. Pat Jennings, Shay Given, both of them were, I think, above everyone.
Actually, Shay Given made his debut for the Republic in Mick McCarthy's very first game in charge, which was a friendly in March 1996 against Russia.
Oh, so I see.
That Roy Keane was sent off, by the way.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's very true indeed. Yes, that's right.
That was a rare occurrence for Roy Keane. He never got sent off. When you look at the match, and as I mentioned, despite the loss, I've actually seen the match several times over the past few years. Karimi had two wonderful chances, a one-on-one break from a Dai pass. Shay Given came out just in time and just threw himself at his feet. Karimi, you would have put your house on him scoring. And then I think maybe a few minutes later, 2, 3, 4 minutes later, another break, this time from a Kavianpur pass. And Karimi went past two defenders, put Gary Breen on his bum, and shot with his left across his body to the left side of Shay Given's goal, when Shay Given should have anticipated the right and somehow made the right anticipation. And that was a world-class save. So if it had finished 2-1, as John indicated, I think that would have changed the Irish approach and mentality for the second match, because it would have been much more tense. But 2-0, I think, upon reflection of the way the match played out, was the fair result.
Yeah, because even Mick McCarthy in the aftermath of that game, he was Ireland had a 2-goal margin to take into the second leg, but Mick McCarthy was delighted that the score was actually 2-0, because he said that 2-0 was a better score to take into the second leg than 3-1.
Yes. What I do want to say as well, and it'd be interesting to see what John's thoughts are about this, Sean. I wasn't really necessarily going to bring this up, but it's always been on my mind. So what better opportunity to have a chat about it than now? I always felt it was odd. Now, Jack Charlton wasn't necessarily a very worldly man. He had his own character, and he was a very strong character. We know Big Jack, Jack LaLad, and all that. I always thought Mick McCarthy was a Jack wannabe in many ways.
Yeah.
And he always came across to me, even when he was a player, as being a little bit too smug for his own limited talents. And again, I apologize for being a little harsh on him, but there are many reasons for me stating this comment. In my opinion, Mick McCarthy as a player would not have gotten into the Iran national team. He was not a standout player. And when he made a comment which did not reflect well on Ireland, because I think the Irish people are much more worldly, much more progressive minded, much more literate than some of the characters that may have misrepresented this fine culture. He made a comment about he knew nothing about Iran or the UAE. I think he mentioned, I know nothing about either of these two teams. And he was almost proud of stating that. And then he did send scouts to watch the Iran UAE matches. So obviously he did his due diligence. But I always thought, we have a great civilization as well. And we've actually qualified for 2 World Cups. And maybe a little bit more respect would have been nice to hear from the person who is representing Ireland at that moment in time in a sporting arena. But I think what's bothering me still to this day is the fact that Roy Keane missed out on a World Cup or a second World Cup, and it should never happen. And I agree with you, John. I think that, in my opinion, that would have been the best Irish team of all time. I think Jack Charlton did a great job with a good team, and Mick McCarthy did a decent job with a very good team.
Yeah, because it was widely felt. Yeah, it was widely felt, DJ, that squad we took in 2002 to the World Cup was the best Irish squad we ever had.
I'm glad I'm glad you're confirming my thoughts.
You were mentioned there about Mick McCarthy. Because Jack, I suppose it maybe in some ways, maybe Jack saw a lot of his own qualities in Mick McCarthy. As a player, maybe, and as a manager, and maybe that's why he kind of gave him a prominent role in the Irish team, eventually making him captain. And of course, Jack's liking for Mick McCarthy actually was the root of a much publicised feud between Jack and a well-known journalist here in Ireland, Eamon Dunphy.
Oh, yes. A big Manchester United supporter.
Yeah, because Eamon was of the view that David O'Leary should be in the Irish team ahead of Mick McCarthy because he was coming down, to either or. It was one of them, being chosen. And David was exiled for 2.5 years for something which was quite petty.
Yes.
And Eamon Dunphy actually became quite a critic of Jack, and Jack did not like this at all, because maybe another reason why he persisted with Mick for so long was maybe Jack felt that he did not want to kind of be seen to give in to the media, kind of dictating to him who should play and who shouldn't.
So ahead of the second leg, what was the atmosphere in the Iran camp and Miroslav Blazevic's strange threat?
The threat to hang himself?
Yes.
Yes, that was typical Blazevic. Although people say that he may have been misquoted by the unofficial interpreter. I say unofficial because we've never had top quality interpreters for our foreign managers.
So maybe
in Iran.
Something was lost in translation, perhaps.
Possibly, but it's so typical Blazevic, and I think he was just trying to help lift the spirits and give the fans as well hope and be portrayed as being very confident, relaying that to the players. I don't think there was a sense of despondency, but I think everyone knew that it was going to be a very, very tough challenge to overcome, to score 2 and not concede. And I think when you look at the match, it was scrappy. Ireland obviously came into the match knowing that they didn't have to risk too much. And I think despite that, they did well to put pressure on Iran and not allow the match to be a one-way traffic effectively. But there was a sense of optimism, but in my mind, it was a sense that we might nick it, but not enough to overcome it. And you have to go back to what all true football fans and supporters, amateur or expert alike, should focus on, and that is do a fair assessment, compare the teams, compare the management, compare the players, and more often than not, the superior team, the superior managers, the superior players will prevail. And I think this is what we ended up with, a top Irish team that, as John even admits, might be considered the best Irish team of all time, against an Iranian team that was on its way up again, but wasn't quite at that same level.
Yeah, a 3-0 win always seemed unlikely.
It wasn't going to happen. I mean, especially with Shay Given. I read a lot of reports emanating from Irish women who attended. I think there's a group, John, called the 42 Irish women who traveled and attended the match. And by and large, I think they're complementary to their experience in the sense that they were well treated. And while in Iran, Iranians, I don't think anyone doubts this, are very hospitable people, very hospitable culture.
There was concern in Ireland leading up to that second leg in that female supporters wouldn't be allowed to attend, because I think it was the practice in Iran that female supporters were not permitted to attend matches because of maybe the vulgar language they might hear. But it was felt then that, the Irish did not speak Farsi, so they wouldn't understand, shall we say, the language or the words that were being used.
Yes, the civilized language of fandom everywhere in the world. No, and I think you're absolutely right about that. It was the first time women actually had attended a football match in Iran since the revolution of 1979. So it was historic in that sense. But some of the Irish women talked about towards the end of the match, when it became clear that Iran was not going to prevail over the two legs, that a lot of the fans turned the stadium into more hostile, volatile atmosphere. I don't recall seeing Yes, I don't recall seeing things being thrown at the women. I do recall that the fans were basically expressing their disappointment, and they were very upset at the result, not at the Irish, but effectively they were just frustrated, disappointed, angry that they were not going to, or their team was not going to qualify, and they let it out. And knowing Iranian fans, I've never seen Iranian fans attack or try to hurt, especially guests. And so I think there was a little bit lost in the sense that the Irish women who may have felt uncomfortable, and I'm sure rightfully so at the end, may have misunderstood the fact that the anger and the venom being demonstrated by the fans was not directed at them for being Irish women, but just at the whole unraveling of the dream.
Yeah, because I remember actually looking on television, and even coming towards the end of that match, it was evident that there was some unrest, shall we say, in the stands.
There was. And I think most of it was aimed at everything that had occurred and almost blaming ourselves, our federation, our manager, our players, the politics of the country. Everything just came out. And I think the Irish women towards the end were caught in the crossfire.
Because actually one point I should have made before now, DJ, and it was actually in the build-up to the first leg of the playoff, was that one of the Irish journalists actually wrote a piece on Iran, kind of tracing their progress in the Asian qualification. And I forget which journalist it was now, but he was making the point that Iran should have automatically qualified, which, as you said earlier in the podcast.
Absolutely. That was a better team than some of the teams that qualified directly later on, in my opinion.
Yes.
But it was still a raw team in the sense that there were several players very inexperienced. The occasion got the better of them. And I don't think any Iran team at the time would have been a match for that particular Irish side. But we were, in my opinion, superior to China and Saudi, and both of those teams qualified. If three teams, and actually in 1998, four teams ended up qualifying from Asia because Iran got past Australia. If there had been one more spot available, it would have been ours. But because, again, South Korea and Japan were co-hosts and they had automatic spots, there was only space for two more plus the playoff team. So these things happen.
And I think as well, DJ, was that also the last occasion that an Asian team ended up playing a European team in an intercontinental playoff? Yeah, I think after 2002, the Asian teams that have gone into the intercontinental playoffs, they've ended up playing teams, from other
Yes, South America, for example, Australia, Uruguay had two playoffs against each other. You're absolutely right. There's never been a European Asian matchup since. Absolutely right. That's the only example of a Europe-Asian playoff.
The second leg was on November 15th at Tehran at Azadi Stadium in front of 120,000 fans. For this match, we have the following lineup. For Iran, Mirzapur, Peyrovani, Gol Mahmadi, Rezai, Minavand, Bagheri, Kavianpur, Madavikia, Karimi, Vahidi Nikbacht, and Ali Dai, captain of the team. For Ireland, Roy Keane is injured, as is Niall Quinn. So we have Shay Given, Finnan, Hart, Bryn. Staunton is captaining the team in Keane's absence. In Keane's absence, you have Mark Kinsella of Charlton Athletic starting. McAteer, Holland. David Connolly of Wimbledon substituting for Niall Quinn. Robbie Keane, He'd be replaced by Clinton Morrison of Crystal Palace in the 76th minute, Kevin Kilban, and he'd be replaced by Gary Kelly in the 82nd minute. Now, this match, Iran would score the winner in the 90th minute, so too late to make any difference. So Madovica took a free kick from the right side, and that was headed in by Gol Mohammadi. And Iran won 1-0, but Ireland had qualified.
Yeah. Well, I remember that game because it was actually played on a Thursday afternoon here. It was actually a 2 o'clock kickoff time here in Ireland. So I actually took a half day from work that day to see the game. But I remember it was a very nondescript game. I suppose there was too much at stake, for it to be a classic game or anything like that. And of course, what was vital from an Irish perspective was that we did not concede an early goal. Because if we had conceded an early goal, well then, we could have been really up against it. And of course, if we were to score one, that would have meant then that Iran would have had to score 4. So, if we had scored, I think we would have been in a very, very strong position indeed. So it was a tense game. And I think it was kind of the tenseness of the occasion kind of kept the game, watchable as a spectacle. Certainly from an Irish point of view anyway, but because we were never sure until maybe the last minute or two that we were going to qualify, because there was always a doubt that if Iran had got a goal, things could change very quickly in Iran's favour. But we held them out. We didn't have many chances in the game. I remember, I think maybe with 20 minutes to go, David Connolly had a half chance, all right, a snapshot. But I don't recall any significant Irish chances. I don't recall Shay Given being tested too much either. So, as I say,
just once. Once. Yeah. Only one save. One save of note.
Yes, because as I say, it was a really nondescript game. It was only kind of the tenseness of the occasion and the fact that there was so much at stake kind of kept the game watchable as a contest. And even when Iran did score their goal at the end, it was felt that it was too late for it to make any impact. And sure enough, about 30 seconds later, the final whistle went.
Yes, within a minute, you're right.
Of course, Ireland, we mentioned, of course, about the absence of Niall Quinn. And you see, Ireland would have had to change maybe their attacking tactics as well for this game, because David Connolly came in, who was sort of, he wasn't a tall man, very like Robbie Keane in stature. Clinton Morrison then came in as a sub who was kind of the same stature as well. None of them were what you describe as target men. So you could not really play high balls into the box, as it were, unless maybe at set pieces when you'd one of your defenders up. But certainly from when we were on the attack, we couldn't play high balls. So that would have hindered us a little bit as well. But overall, it was a competent performance. It was the only defeat that Ireland suffered in the entire World Cup qualification.
Yes.
Yeah. And to a good Iran team at that, because we knew that even though we got the better of Iran, we did know that Iran were still in many ways of the standard that was required to play at a World Cup. So, it was a feeling of a job very well done, that we had come through a tough qualifying group, and we had got over a quality team in the intercontinental playoffs. So, as far as Ireland was concerned, anyway, it was, there was a feeling of contentment and satisfaction. Now, the celebrations were somewhat muted because there wasn't any wild celebration on this occasion, because it was our third World Cup in 4 years. So I suppose we were getting accustomed, to qualifying for World Cup at this stage. So the celebrations were a little bit more muted, but still there was when
you say celebrations, John, you mean in Ireland or amongst the players and management?
Oh no, in Ireland itself.
Oh, I see. Yes.
There was no, I don't recall any, shall we say, taken to the streets in celebration or anything like that. It was sort of accepted that we were regularly qualifying for tournaments, so it was kind of taken almost.
Yeah, and also after the first leg win, maybe there was not a dramatic element to it either, as far as the qualification. Yeah.
That's a good point as well.
Yeah, in actual fact, for a neutral now, if I had been watching this second leg as a neutral and watching the way the game would have panned out, I would not have taken a half day from work for it. Because, it was overall a poor spectacle. As I say, it was only the tenseness of what was at stake, and the occasion kept the game watchable, as it were.
And yes, it wasn't a high-quality match. I agree with you, John. It wasn't a high-quality match. But I'm glad you took the day off or half day off, because I believe that we have to witness history live if possible, if given the opportunity. And all of this is history, right? It's part of the grand story of football across the globe. They are all these events and incidents and results and experiences are interconnected. And if you miss part of it, you may not quite have the full picture that you have now.
And you see, needless to say, in my workplace anyway, for that second leg, there was a rush of applicants, for half days and full days. But I had actually booked a half day 3 weeks beforehand, because in one of the Irish newspapers, I think when they mentioned this game, and it was in a very small paragraph, almost at the end of the page, they said that the second leg would be played on Thursday, November 15th in Iran, 2 p.m. Irish time. So I took a chance, booked a half day, and sure enough, I got in nice and early.
Smart man.
As far as Iran, at the time, I felt that I remember if I had a conversation with someone that loss against Bahrain was the opportunity loss. All this would have been for not had they won that game, I feel like.
I agree, Sean. And we go back to the two teams that did qualify from Asia, China and Saudi Arabia. They both had awful performances at the 2002 World Cup. Saudi Arabia, they lost 3 matches, were outscored 12 goals to nil. They didn't score a single goal. And China, nil goals scored, 5 goals conceded. Again, I'm convinced Iran would have put up a much, much better performance in either of these two nations. But you have to look back at that Bahrain match. And in my opinion, it didn't even need to come down to Bahrain. That was a terrible, terrible day. But if we had defeated Thailand in Thailand, as we should have, the Saudis defeated Thailand 4-1, for example, in Bangkok. We tied 0-0. Very hot, very humid. Yes, I understand. But you've got to get past Thailand. And we tied Bahrain in Tehran. Again, poorly officiated match, 2 very good goals disallowed. That put us in the hole by 4 points. So if we had won those 2 matches, we could have still lost 3-1 to Bahrain and qualified directly. And so I agree with you. And it just wasn't meant to be. I do feel sorry for some of the players who basically this was their swan song, so to speak, and it ended on a disappointing note. But that's just the way football is. Generations develop and evolve and reach peaks, and then eventually everything comes to an end. I don't really feel like we ever got over, we meaning true fans and supporters, that 3-1 loss to Bahrain. As I mentioned, one of the teams I look forward to playing or look forward to Iran playing is always Bahrain. Every match is a revenge of that 3-1 defeat because of the lack of sportsmanship, because of the cauldron they created, the hate that they spewed, the players that were sent off simply because of play acting and just unsportsmanlike behavior by the Bahrainis. It'll never be forgotten, as far as I'm concerned. And yet, when you lose to Ireland, you don't have any ill feelings or bitter aftertaste. First of all, because we tried our best and we
there was a recognition that they were a better team, I would say.
Absolutely. A better team in many ways, and certainly a more deserving opponents to go through than either Saudi Arabia, China, and fortunately Bahrain has yet to make an appearance at the World Cup. So I think the football gods are keeping the scales of justice to some extent balanced still.
And of course, for the Irish, it's strange to say, but Mick McCarthy never really did get a bounce as far as public opinion for qualifying, I imagine.
No, he didn't. No, I mean, after this, of course, the assessment would have been, fairly good. He had rebuilt the team, introduced a number of younger players. We had come close to qualifying, certainly for the previous European Championships, but we had qualified for this World Cup. So with a lot of young players on board and the possibility of more players coming on stream, more young players at that, there was a general feeling of optimism. Now, I mean, of course, nobody could have foreseen the events that were to happen the following May in Saipan or the subsequent falling out with Roy Keane. But I mean, at that particular time in November of 2001, the overall assessment to Mick was very positive because in that, okay, he would have espoused, shall we say, a fair deal of the Jack Charlton type tactics. But under Mick, Ireland, they were able to play a bit of football as well. They were able to knock the ball around and so on and so on. So they could play a bit as well. So overall, the assessment was good. But I mean, it was felt that, in order to have a successful World Cup, we were going to have a full strength squad. And of course, the fitness or otherwise of Roy Keane was going to be key to that as to how we would do at that World Cup. But as I say, at that time, November 2001 anyway, the assessment of Mick was reasonably good, and people acknowledged that he had got us to a World Cup despite several difficult obstacles being thrown in our way, namely the quality of teams that we would have come up against in qualification. So, yeah, the overall assessment was fairly positive.
Sean, I have to say on behalf of Blažević, his popularity did not suffer. He remains one of the most popular national team managers, I believe, of all time. He handed over the reins to Ivanković. Ivanković did a very good job, I thought, under the circumstances. The players who were just being drafted in, who had been spotted or scouted by Blažević and his team, developed to top-class players. The ones who retired were at the end of their tenure anyway. And I think this also reflects on the fact that the Iranian populace didn't view this as a end of the road or a disaster, part of a rebuilding process. And we looked forward to the next Asian Cup in 2004 and then the 2006 World Cup with confidence. It's interesting, when you read out the team sheets, Iran didn't change its starting lineup for either match. And you would have thought perhaps they would have done so. But it was a 5-3-2 effectively, or a 5-3-1-1 in Dublin that then converted to a 3-5-2 in Tehran. And so it was a tactical switch, but the personnel remained the same. And if you have one justified criticism of the Iranian team at the time is that we didn't have a deep bench. It wasn't like you could bring in a couple of players and change the entire match because of their quality. There were players on the bench who eventually would prove to be top class, but not quite yet ready at the time. And so I think it's fair to say that it was in the stars. The alignment was such that the better team should have won and did. And when I say win, move forward and qualify. But it wasn't the end of the road so much for Iran as it was
Right. There was not this feeling that, okay, that's it, this generation is over, they're not going to qualify for the next 20 years. You always felt they were in an upward trajectory. There would be regular qualifiers like, I don't know, South Korea or
Absolutely.
other.
Still a top Asian team with better days to come. The one downside that still hurts to this day is Karim Bagheri took the elimination very personally. He was also criticized heavily for the Bahrain loss, which was unfair, and decided to quit the national team. And we missed 8 years of Karim Bagheri. When you see that he scored 50 international goals as a defensive midfielder primarily, having played just 6 years for the national team, if he had played 8 more years, I think Cristiano Ronaldo might have still been running after his all-time goal-scoring records. No, I'm actually exaggerating, of course, now, but Karim Bagheri should have finished with 140 caps, 90 goals, which would have been an incredible tally, and still is. I mean, 50 goals on the international scene. He's in the top 40 of all time. And this was a midfielder, mostly defensive-minded, mostly the player who kept things ticking and moving forward. But that was the sad part, that Bagheri took the elimination personally, felt that he didn't get the support of the federation. They kind of threw him under the bus, and the fans' reaction to the loss was hard for someone like Karim Bagheri, who's a true gentleman, a true, wonderful character who loves Iran, loves Iranian football, is immensely popular amongst all the fans. Doesn't matter which club you support. We missed Bagheri. If we had a Karim Bagheri in 2006, if we had a Karim Bagheri in 2004 in the Asian Cup, who knows what would have happened. Come back for the last qualifying campaign of 2010, last couple of matches, and actually scored an incredible goal. It was just amazing. Karim Bagheri just would show up and score goals. So it was nice that he ended with a nice friendly match against Brazil, where he played 10 minutes as a measure of thanks from the federation. So it ended on a positive note, but that was the one takeaway from 2001 that still hurts. We lost Karim Bagheri for 8 years.
In closing, for each respective nation, what is the historical and cultural legacy of these qualifiers, and is it remembered to this day?
Well, in Ireland, for obvious reasons, it is remembered because even though it wasn't foreseen at the time, unfortunately, this has been our last successful qualification campaign for a World Cup. And just to make one salient point on this, since that World Cup, we have not qualified for a World Cup, and Iran qualified for the next World Cup in 2006, and they've been at every World Cup since then.
We did miss 2010, but yes, 14, 18, 22.
Yeah.
But it's also become so much easier to qualify now. I mean, it's not as great an achievement. I still tell my son, 1978, there were 16 nations, only one from Asia, and making it to that World Cup, I think, was a bigger achievement than any of the subsequent World Cups Iran has qualified for, because of how competitive and how difficult it was to become a World Cup qualifier. And Ireland's playing in Europe. And perhaps, yes, you're missing some of those former greats that haven't quite. I'm trying to think of the last Irish player that I would, Declan Rice aside, that I would classify as world class. And I can't think of any to match players like Shea Given, Liam Brady.
Well, Jack Grealish, as you know, played underage for Ireland, but then he threw in his senior allegiance with England.
Yeah, I just don't understand this, John. I don't understand it.
But then in an overall sense, DJ, we can't say too much either in Ireland, because, I mean, certainly during the Jack Charlton years and to an extent and for a little while under Mick McCarthy, you know, we qualified. We had the advantage of English-born players declaring for us. So, I mean, you know, the work both ways in that respect.
You're right. Absolutely. I agree with you.
With regards, going back to Jack Charlton, I mean, two key players for him that were with him really all the days of his Irish journey were two English-born players, namely Ray Houghton and John Aldridge, who benefited from.
Absolutely.
Then you see as well, the fact that we haven't been successful, naturally enough, players with dual nationality or who could declare for Ireland, you know, may be understandably reluctant to declare for us. You know, seeing that we have been in decline now for some time at international level. And okay, there has been the odd hint maybe of a resurgence or whatever, resurgence, but it hasn't really transpired. And unfortunately, the way things are at the moment, it's going to be, I think, some time before we qualify for certainly a World Cup again. We may be all right for the next Euros in 2028 in that there is a possibility, depending on how the results go, that we may end up, even though we will have to play in the qualification zone, we may end up participating in the tournament itself, depending on how the other host nations fare in their qualification game. Yeah.
We all miss the Irish presence and the Irish fans and everything good that comes with that.
Yeah. But I suppose really what it showed as well was that since we have kind of regressed, a lot of the fair weather supporters have sort of gone as well. And you see, this was really in one way, now I suppose any successful team will have their level of fair weather supporters, but particularly, you know, when a team goes into decline or goes back a bit, then the true support, you know, the people that stick by him. And I think as well, you see, there is still, you see, a lot of people started following soccer in Ireland when we qualified for Euro 88.
Yes.
And then subsequently qualified for Italia 90. And a lot of people, I would say even to this day, are of the opinion that the success we enjoyed under Jack Charlton was solely down to Jack. When in actual fact it wasn't. I mean, okay, Jack put the finishing touches to a project that was already there, but there was foundations already in place when Jack took the job in 1986. But unfortunately, you see a lot of supporters, and I have mentioned this on previous podcasts with Shahan, a lot of supporters, shall we say, they sort of, as I say, they tend to be fair weather, and unfortunately, the fair weather supporters in those times have outnumbered the knowledgeable supporters. And really, the clash between Mick McCarthy and Roy Keane and Saipan in 2002, it wasn't just a clash between two individuals. It was also a clash between two ways of thinking. The two elements of Irish sports followers, in that it was a clash between those who believed that kind of qualifying for a tournament or doing well was good enough in itself. And then there were those who felt that, seeing that we were good enough, we should maybe take it seriously. And if we can take it seriously, there's no reason why we can't achieve success or go a long way in these tournaments.
Well, John, and if that had been the course of action and the direction that Irish football had taken perhaps some of these players who have dual nationality or who are eligible for multiple countries to represent multiple countries, two or more, would have then picked Ireland because it would have been a more professional setup, more successful, more
Yes.
fans, more support.
Yeah, and then DJ as well, unfortunately, the way the FAI was run, and
Yes.
even up to the present day, kind of on occasions has left a lot to be desired. Because I even remember Roy Keane even said in his book that for the vital qualifying game in Dublin in September 2001 against the Netherlands, the pre-match meal was apparently sandwiches. And Roy Keane says, I mean, you don't have a pre-match meal going into a game of such magnitude as just a selection of sandwiches. So
Also, I recall reading about how for some of the away matches, the FAI officials would be in first class, the players would be in coach.
yes, that's right. Yeah.
Things of that sort.
Yeah.
Yes. And that doesn't settle
Yeah.
well. I agree totally.
In recent years, there was a CEO of the FAI, John Delaney, who really has covered himself in infamy, because of the way he was running the FAI. He was profiting himself personally out of it as well. And that has left a bad taste. And you see, all these things, it's okay. Maybe in Ireland, maybe some of us can kind of laugh at these things and say, it's part of the Irish culture and all that. But you see, it does not give a good picture of us outside of Ireland, internationally.
I agree.
And maybe that's why players are reluctant as well to declare, because I have no doubt that if we were more successful and qualifying for tournaments, I have no doubt that we would have certainly more English-born players qualifying for or making this available to play for us.
But John, to make you feel better and to also state something that I believe to be a fact, the problems in Irish football administration pale in comparison to the problems our players and our football have to deal with in terms of Iranian federation, mismanagement, corruption. Iranian football has suffered immeasurably as a result as well. And I think the only thing that keeps us going is raw talent and a sense that young Iranians are still proud to represent Iran, their nation, their family, their supporters, their people. And that's the only thing that keeps us going, because really, compared to even the worst mismanagement that you may consider has affected Irish football negatively, it's nothing compared to the awful mess that Iranian football faces and has been facing for decades now. But hopefully all of this will pass as well.
Yeah, and of course, one other important point is that the way the Premier League has taken off, particularly in the last 20 years or 15 years or so, with the influx of players from overseas and all over the world, that has hindered the progress of Irish players as well. Those who go to England and want to make a
Excellent
career.
point. Yeah. Excellent point. Where's the next George Best? Whether it's from Northern Ireland or from the Republic. Would a George Best get the chance that he was provided in the early 60s?
Djamshid. And as far as these playoffs, I imagine historically, because of the elimination, perhaps they're not as referenced.
Perhaps not. Let me see if I can conveniently bring this along. In my handy statistical history of Iran at the World Cup, I have referred to here in the section just a kind of a photographic journey. I use the Miracle in Melbourne caption, but I also use and refer to the two matches against Ireland as, so you'll have two photographs of the Iran-Ireland playoff qualifiers, one a reflection of the match in Dublin, the other one in Tehran. And the heading is "A Bridge Too Far." And so I think that's the most appropriate final comment and word that I can come up with to describe the Ireland-Iran playoffs. It was a bridge too far for Iran.
And then again, just to kind of finish up on those playoffs, DJ, if Iran maybe had drawn another European team, I mean, who knows? Iran could have got through. Yeah.
The styles of play, the footballing philosophy, the Irish grit, determination, cohesion, fighting for each other, tough tackling. These are national characteristics that perhaps we would have done better with Portugal if you had finished first, and we would have avoided one another.
I mean, you could have easily drawn teams, say, like the Ukraine or Romania in 2001 as well. And maybe you would have gotten these teams.
But this is what makes football so fascinating on a global level. Everyone has a tale to tell. Anything could have been possible.
Equally, we could have drawn Germany in those playoffs because Germany were in the playoffs too that year. So, I mean, who knows?
Sure. That's a very good
Mm.
point, actually. I didn't recall or remember that Germany were in the playoffs.
They were, because they were in the group within
Oh,
the
yeah,
England.
Oh,
right.
yes, that's right.
So they
The
drew
5-1.
Ukraine
Yes,
in
the
the
5-1.
playoff. Yeah,
Yes, they fell, and they ended up playing
Ukraine.
Ukraine. Yes,
Yeah.
very good point. Both John and Shahan, thanks for reminding me. Yes, you're right. It could have been totally
Yeah,
different.
because I actually did see that Germany-Ukraine playoff, both legs of it as well. And I have to say that, kind of the Ukraine really at that time, they weren't really, they were still emerging, so I
Yes,
think
they
maybe
were.
if Iran had drawn them, Iran could possibly have taken them over the two legs.
Very good point. Very good point.
Well, we'll never know, I guess. So
No, but
Yes.
it's still, as you mentioned, Sean, and obviously that's the reason why you have this podcast today referencing this theme. It was historic and it had after effects, and it's something that we can look back and recall with fondness, irregardless of the result.
indeed. Well, with that, I would like to thank both of you for your participation in this interview. You've both been on many times, but this is the first time together. So thank you
A pleasure.
once again. And all our respective contact information is listed on the blog and podcast uploads. So once again, thanks to both of you. And I hope to continue these discussions on football history.
Yes, and thanks very much to you as well, Shahan, because I mean, if it wasn't for you, I mean, fair dues to you and maybe Paul as well, kind of in earlier days, for bringing so varied and multicultural panel of football anoraks and historians and reminiscence all together.
Yes, thank you, Sean. I concur totally with what John mentioned and commented. And meeting wonderful people like John wouldn't happen without your good offices and mediative effort.
See? Yeah. Likewise, DJ, I would totally concur with that as well.
Thanks again.